How your brain thinks you out of taking action. Have you ever spent more time thinking about doing something and then it would have taken to actually do it? I have. In fact, this podcast is a perfect example. I want to start a podcast for almost 3 years. 3 years. I thought about it, I planned it, I imagined what it might look like. I thought about what I would talk about, and then I thought about everything that could go wrong. What if nobody watches it? What if nobody likes it? What if I sound stupid? What if I make mistakes? What if I embarrass myself? And underneath all of these questions was probably one bigger question: what if I fail? So I kept thinking and thinking, but I wasn't recording. At some point, I realized something very simple. I am not perfect. This podcast is not going to be perfect. I'm going to make mistakes, and that's okay because eventually I start asking myself a different question. Why do I want to do this? And the answer was actually pretty simple. I want to tell a story. I want to explain the brain in a way that makes sense. I want somebody who is struggling to hear something and say, "Ah, that's what's happening to me." If I can explain somebody understand themselves a little better, maybe it's worth being embarrassed once in a while. Maybe it's worth putting something into the world that isn't perfect. Once that became clear, something changed. I stopped waiting to feel completely ready and I started. 3 years of thinking, and now here I am recording episode 2. And that's what we are going to talk about today. Why is starting sometimes so difficult? Why can't you know exactly what you need to do, want to do it, and still not do it? Why do we wait? Why do we procrastinate? And why does your brain sometimes make a small task feel enormous before you even begin? Because sometimes what looks like a motivation problem isn't really a motivation problem at all. Sometimes it's a fear, sometimes it is uncertainty, sometimes it's perfectionism, sometimes it is depression, sometimes it is ADHD, sometimes it is anxiety, sometimes you are just exhausted, and sometimes you have simply thought about something for so long that thinking has replaced doing. There is a strange distance between saying, I should do this, and actually doing it. You probably know exactly what I mean when I talk about it. You tell yourself you are going to exercise, but first you sit down for a minute, then you pick up your phone, you scroll a little, and then you think, I will exercise after I finish this. But you're still there, and maybe you need to clean a kitchen and you look at it and you think about everything that needs to be done: the dishes, the counter, the floor, the trash need to be taken out, and suddenly cleaning kitchen feels like you have been asked to remodel the entire house. You don't start. Maybe you have a project for a work. I see version of this in my patients all the time. I see version of it in myself. Sometimes I jokingly tell my patient, almost like that old Nike slogan, just do it. But I don't mean that in a dismissive way. I'm not saying it stop complaining and work harder. I'm saying it's something different. Sometimes your thinking is keeping you from reaching the starting line. You're trying to solve every problem before you begin, trying to predict how you will feel, trying to predict whether you will succeed, trying to figure out the perfect approach. And sometimes the solution is not another 20 minutes of thinking. Sometimes you need one small action. Your brain is constantly asking, is this worth it? Your brain doesn't simply decide whether you want something. It is constantly making calculation, usually without you realizing it. How much effort will this take? How likely am I to succeed? How valuable is this reward? Could something go wrong? Is there an easier option available right now? And imagine you are sitting on your couch. You know that exercise will probably make you feel better, but exercise requires something immediately. You have to stand up, change clothes, find your shoes, maybe drive somewhere, or simply start moving. You have to tolerate some discomfort and the reward that comes later. Now look at your phone, almost no effort, immediate stimulation, something new every few seconds, another video, another message, another headline. Your brain is comparing these options not as a philosopher, as a biological system trying to decide what is worth doing right now. And the easiest immediate reward often has powerful advantage. This is the one reason why telling someone, you know, exercise is good for you, often doesn't change anything. They already know. The problem isn't the knowledge. Knowing and doing are not the same thing. Dopamine is not just a pleasure chemical. You probably heard dopamine described as the brain pleasure chemical. That's oversimplification. Dopamine is involved much more than feeling pleasure. It participates in learning, motivation, attention, reward prediction, and helping your brain decide whether something may be worth pursuing. In simple terms, dopamine helps learn this matters. Pay attention. Maybe do that again. Because the brain is not only asking, will I enjoy this? It is also asking, is this worth the effort? There are network involved in the prefrontal cortex, the anterior cingulate cortex, the basal ganglia, the reward related areas of the striatum. And that helps your brain evaluate options and translate inattention into an action. You don't need to remember all those names. The important point is this: wanting to do something and initiate the action are not exactly the same process. You can generally want the outcome and still struggle with the start. Why the first step feels so big? Have you ever noticed that a task can feel terrible before you start? And then once you are doing it, it is not nearly as bad? The anticipation can be worse than the action. Think about going to the gym, and for 40 minutes, you will be arguing with yourself. I don't feel like going. I'm tired. I don't have enough time. Eventually, you go, and 15 minutes into the workout, you think, this is actually fine. So, what happened? Before you started, your brain was working mostly with prediction. How difficult will this be? What if I am exhausted? Is this going to be miserable? But once you begin, predictions are replaced with the information. Now your brain knows, I'm walking. This is manageable. That's one of the ideas I want you to remember from this episode. Action create information that thinking cannot. You can think about swimming for 6 months. You still don't know what the water feels like until you get in. I could think about creating a podcast for 3 years, and I did, but I did not know what recording a podcast actually felt like until I recorded one. Action gives your brain a new evidence, and sometimes that evidence changes everything. Sometimes we aren't waiting for motivation. We tell ourselves, I'm waiting until I feel motivated, but sometimes actually waiting for something else. We are waiting for certainty. We want to know, will this work? Will I be good at it? Will people approve? Will I succeed? And here's the problem: for many meaningful things in life, you don't get those answers in advance. You get them after you start. When I was thinking about this podcast, I want reassurance. I wanted some imaginary guarantee that people would like it, but nobody could give me that. I could record the greatest podcast in the world, and someone would still dislike it. Someone could criticize my accent, someone could disagree with me, someone could think I'm boring. I cannot control that. So eventually the question became, am I willing to do something meaningful, even if someone doesn't like it? For me, the answer became yes. And that changed the calculation. Perfectionism can look like high standard. Perfectionism is interesting, but it can disguise itself as a responsibility. You tell yourself, I just wanted to do it properly. That sounds reasonable, but sometimes properly keeps moving further away. You need a better plan, better equipment, more information, more preparation, more confidence, and suddenly perfectionism has accomplished something remarkable. It has protected you from ever discovering whether you might fail. Because if you never start, you never technically fail, but you also never succeed. Perfectionism can become a very sophisticated form of avoidance. And there is another trap. Sometimes we compare our first attempt to somebody else's 100th attempt. You decide you want to make videos, then you watch someone who has been making videos for 10 years. Their lighting is perfect, their editing is perfect, their delivery looks like effortless. Then you record yourself for the first time and you think, ah, I suck at this. I'm terrible at this. Of course, you are not as polished. You're comparing episode 1 to somebody else's episode 400. That isn't fair comparison. That's often evidence that you are finally starting to learn. The brain likes to avoid discomfort. There is another reason we delay. Avoidance works, at least temporarily. Suppose you have an uncomfortable phone call to make or an uncomfortable discussion with a family member. You think about calling, you feel anxious, your heart is pounding, and you say, I will do it tomorrow. What happens immediately? Your anxiety decreases, your brain just learned something. Avoiding that phone call produces relief. Relief can reinforce this behavior. Tomorrow, you think about the call again, anxiety appears, your heart is pounding again, you may be sweating, you avoid it again, relief. Now your brain is getting very good at avoiding that call. This is one reason anxiety and procrastination can be connected. You aren't necessarily avoiding the task, you may be avoiding the feeling associated with the task: embarrassment, uncertainty, boredom, frustration, fear, possibility of rejection, possibility of failure, danger avoided. Except the danger may not really be danger. Sometimes it's just discomfort. And if we treat every uncomfortable feeling as a signal to stop, and life can become very, very small. You don't have to remove the feeling first. This is important. Many people believe they need to eliminate anxiety before doing the thing that makes them anxious. They need to feel confident before giving the presentation, feel motivated before exercising, feel inspired before writing, feel completely prepared before applying, feel fearless before taking a risk. But human beings don't always work that way. Sometimes you act while the feeling is still there. You can be nervous and still make the phone call. You can feel unmotivated and still walk for 10 minutes. You can feel embarrassed and still publish the video. Courage is not always absence of fear. Sometimes courage is deciding that something else matters more. That's what happened to me with this podcast. To fear didn't need to become zero. My reason for doing it simply needed to become bigger. But not everything is just do it. Now I want to be careful here because there is a danger in taking this message too far. Not every person get started is overthinking. Telling someone with severe depression, ADHD, overwhelming anxiety sleep deprivation, or another medical or psychiatric problem to simply try harder can completely miss what is happening. In depression, even basic activities can require enormous effort. Getting out of bed, taking a shower, responding to people, preparing food, things that once happened almost automatically can feel unbelievably difficult. We talked about some of this in episode 1 when we discussed anhedonia. In ADHD, problem with executive functioning can make task initiation particularly difficult. Someone may understand exactly what needs to happen and struggle to organize attention and move into an action. With anxiety, the brain may spend enormous amount of energy anticipating what could go wrong. So, this episode is not everybody is lazy, not at all. The better question is what is creating the friction between inattention and action? Because different causes require different solution. Don't say clean the house. Your brain responds differently to vague tasks and concrete actions. Clean the house is enormous. Your brain doesn't see one task, it sees a cloud of work. Compare that with put the dishes in the dishwasher. That's visible, specific, finite. Or instead of I need to exercise, try put on my shoes and walk outside. You're reducing what I would like to call the activation energy, the amount of effort to require cross from not doing to doing. And once you are moving, continuing is often easier than starting. That is why a tiny first step is not silly. It can be neurologically practical. Don't write the report. Open the document. Don't clean the house. Pick up 5 things. Don't record an entire podcast. Turn on the camera and record the first paragraph. The goal of the first step is not always to finish. Sometimes the goal is simply to change your state from not started to started. Thinking can feel like work. This may be one of the biggest traps. Thinking feels productive because your brain is busy researching, comparing, imagining, problem solving. You may genuinely feel exhausted afterwards, but busy is not the same as moving. There are times when careful thinking is extremely important. I'm a physician. Believe me, there are situations where I absolutely want people to think before they act. But there is also a point where thinking stops improving decisions. You're not gaining new information anymore. You're cycling through the same question. What if? Maybe. But. Should I? What if? At that point, more thinking can create the illusion of a control. You feel like you are working on the problem, but you are standing in the exact same place. Sometimes the only way to get next piece of information is to move. Cost of not starting. We often think about the risk of doing something, but we do not always think about the risk of not doing it. I spent 3 years thinking about this podcast. Now, I'm not going to beat myself up over that. Maybe I wasn't ready. Maybe I needed that time. But I can also ask, what could I have learned during these 3 years? If I had started earlier, I could have made mistake earlier. I could have improved earlier. I could have helped somebody earlier. Failure gives you information too. This is important, we forget. Success teaches you, failure teaches you, but never starting, that often teaches you very little because nothing happened. Try this question the next time you are stuck. I want you to notice what your brain is doing. Don't immediately criticize yourself. Don't say I'm lazy. Instead, ask, what am I actually waiting for? Am I waiting to feel motivated? Am I waiting to feel more confident? Am I waiting for the perfect time? Am I afraid of making the wrong decision? Am I afraid someone will judge me? Is this task too vague? Am I exhausted? Am I depressed? Am I distracted? The question can change everything because once you identify the friction, you can respond to the actual problem. Make the first move small. If you're waiting to exercise, don't promise yourself an hour. Walk for 5 minutes. If you're waiting to write, write one paragraph. If you have been avoiding cleaning, choose one surface. If you're considering a project you want to do for years, create the first ugly version. I really do mean ugly. Your first attempt doesn't need to impress anyone or anybody. It needs to exist. Because once something exists, you can improve it. You cannot edit something you never created. You cannot improve a plan or a workout you have never started. You cannot learn from a conversation you never had. Sometimes action comes before motivation. We often imagine this sequence. First, I become motivated, then I act, then I accomplish something. But life frequently works the other way. You take a small action, the action creates momentum. Momentum creates an evidence. That evidence changes what you believe you can do. And then motivation increases. So sometimes the sequence is action first, motivation second. That's why waiting for motivation can become a trap. You may be waiting for a feeling that your behavior is actually capable of creating. What are you willing to be bad at? That's another question I have started to like. What are you willing to be bad at for a while? Because almost everything meaningful has a period when you are not very good. Learning a language, public speaking, exercising, running a business, making videos, playing an instrument, writing, podcasting. An uncomfortable part is that other people sometimes get to see you learning, and that means they may see your mistakes. That's embarrassing, but embarrassment is survivable. A mistake is survivable, and sometimes the willingness to be imperfect is the price of something good. So when I look back at the 3 years before starting this podcast, I don't think the lesson is I should have tried harder. The lesson is more interesting. I was asking the wrong question. I kept asking, what if I fail? Now I ask, what if this helps someone? I keep asking, what if somebody thinks I'm not good enough? Now I think, I'm not going to be perfect anyway. I kept waiting until I was no longer afraid of embarrassment. Eventually, I realized I don't need to eliminate embarrassment. I just need to decide whether what I'm doing matters more than the embarrassment. And for me, it does. That's why I'm sitting here, episode 2. Not perfect, still learning, probably making mistake, but doing it. The one thing I want you to remember, if you remember one thing from this episode, remember this. Thinking is supposed to help us act, but sometimes thinking becomes the thing that prevents the action. There is a time to think, there is a time to plan, there is a time to prepare. And then there is a time when the next useful thing your brain needs is not another thought, it is an experience. It is one phone call, one paragraph, one walk, one conversation, one recording, one imperfect first step. You may not feel ready, you may still be nervous, you may still have doubts. That's okay because sometimes confidence does not come before action. Confidence is built by action. And sometimes the first step does something that the 3 year of thinking cannot. It gives your brain an evidence that you can move. So if there is something you have been thinking about for a long time, maybe don't ask yourself today, can I finish it? Ask, what is the smallest thing I can do to start? And then do that. I will see you in the next episode.